Yeah. I have an office in Berlin since I've been living there for 25 years. And I would say that maybe my contribution to sustainability is that we do a lot of work with existing buildings. So we can kind of, by transforming the existing spaces, we kind of, I always feel, get a bit of a free energy as opposed to building new buildings. So maybe that can be one part of my sustainable approach. And the other thing I would like to talk about today is the theme of the space and the experience, because I think one has to, when you talk about architecture, in a sense, think about how you actually experience space. So how do I experience this space, and how do other people experience space, and how short people experience space differently from tall people, or young people from old people. And that is maybe the big difference, and why it's not quite there yet with all this virtual digital space, that you, as your brain kind of simplifies things and you associate with things, and you also always see what's in the back of you. So I've always felt that that's what kind of interests me, in changing your perspective and walking through the projects as you work through them. I'm going to start with a very small, simple project in Neukölln for a Norwegian artist called Goro Tronsmo. She's a young Norwegian artist working with performance art, and she, in her work, tries to change everyday life situations. So under the theme Architecture for Better Living, the question is, what is living in the sense of where do you live, or what is living in the sense of where do you work, or what is living in the sense of what is private and what is public. And she bought this apartment, like many other Scandinavian architects, especially Norwegian, because they have so much money, in Berlin. You know, it was still cheap in Neukölln. Panierstraße, very simple apartment. And then we sat down together and we talked about all the ideas and all the possibilities. And I started to say, on a theoretical level, when I work with existing buildings, the first thing I do is that I think about what can I take out of it. So I try to clean it up. What's really important to keep, and what can I clean out so that I can start on a bit of a freer page and not be so kind of restricted by the building. Then Goro went home, and about 3 weeks later we met again at her apartment, and she'd already pulled down all the walls herself. So I was very happy that she pulled down the non-load-bearing walls so that the rest didn't crash in. And then we developed this idea of kind of putting in another layer in the apartment where you can kind of see, sort of, you suddenly change the perspective of how you live. And you can see on this very simple diagram here, this is the workspace, this is eating, this is sleeping, this is the bathroom, and somehow at the same time you can have symposiums there, you can work there, you can dance on top of the table, you dance on your kitchen. Your kitchen is the floor, or the floor is something that you can get down into, so you can change the level from normally. Everything is a lot of the buildings that we build nowadays, because it's normally quite expensive to build split levels and all that stuff, is always very straight. So so this is a possibility to actually change the perspective of how you see the apartment. And you can sit up here, and what was before a window, a normal sized, normal standard Berlin apartment window, is now a balcony on that side, and you can sit up here with your friends. And this is a favorite part for Goro. She can sit in the bathroom and still talk to our friends while they're there, and you're not so excluded just because you have to go to the bathroom. I'm not so sure her friends think that is quite normal, but that's the nice part of it. So talking about sustainability, if I'm saying it's sustainable to try and I've been doing kind of conversions of bunkers, which in a way has a sustainable aspect to it, because you convert a space that's otherwise not used, and that unfortunately was built in concrete and not in brick, so you can't dismantle it. Most of the bunkers in Berlin, for instance, were were demolished by explosion after the war, and but this one wasn't, because it was too close to other buildings and that had actually survived the war. On the other hand, I must say it's very difficult to argue sustainability when you think about it in a deeper sense, because this is a building built by really, really stupid, horrible people during a horrible wartime situation in the fascist Nazi Berlin times in 1942 to protect themselves, but of course also to protect the normal people. So how do you deal with that? And at the same time, now there's an art collection in it, which in itself also has a sort of elitarian outlook on the whole thing. So is this in a way participatory, or is it sustainable? But it's kind of changing something that is there. And this is how when we approached this project, we thought, okay, how are we going to deal with this? It's quite difficult to deal with a building like that, because it is a really horrible building in a way, but it's also quite beautiful. Bonat's the architect of this. You can see it's got a axial symmetrical situation. You know, he must have liked palazzos and things like that. And so you have these 4 fantastic intertwining staircases, a very, very simple system for the whole thing. It housed over 2,000 people that could sit in here. They're protected by 2 meters of concrete walls and another layer of concrete walls on the inside, and this is where the people come. And then with each staircase you can go very, very quickly around the building. So when we saw this and we started working with this space, we were in this kind of situation where we, on the one hand, you know, we have this aggressive building, and on the other hand it's actually quite beautiful. So we tried to find a way, and we also were lucky because other people had used it before us, so we could kind of build on that as well. You can see here these the traces of the wood in the concrete, and you can see the wooden oak hand railing, which are all original from 1942. And then as well we found, of course, it was a club. You know, it was the 90s in Berlin. It's right next to the Reichstag. It's very close to Friedrichstraße. And it's actually where the whole club movement started. It was very famous people that went there in the beginning. I didn't go. I was working in an architect's office. I didn't have time to go clubbing, even though I was in Berlin in the beginning of the 90s. But the other people that I've met that used to go there in the 90s, they still have a very big smile, and you can see they had a good time there. And so there are some remainders of that clubbing scene, like the dark rooms that were painting black and blue, or the other ones that were painting. So we kind of moved onto that. And also during the DDR times, it had been used to store fruit and vegetables for the people from the party who had access to their own bananas that the other people couldn't access. Our art collector bought this, and he said, I want to live with my art, and I want to have a house on top of it. And this is the art collector, Christian Boros. And this was at the time, his collection was just a new published book of the contemporary art that he was collecting. And it was all about actually living together with his art, which is maybe not so easy in a bunker. So we started destroying it from the inside in a way. And that was it's really nice to work with a project which is actually the other way around. You're not adding something, you're actually subtracting. So that's quite interesting. And we worked on taking out ceilings, and by taking out these ceilings, we created a completely new orientation in the building and connected the different floors with each other. Here you can see, for instance, one of these blue painted rooms where the big parts of the ceiling had been taken out. And you've got to imagine this was all done more or less by hand. Of course with saws, but by hand, with handicraft, because of the 2 meter thick wall that you couldn't get any machines through. What happens is you can start creating, you can now move through the building. You have, in a different way, you can orientate yourself, and you have the traces of the sawn-off structure here and the traces of the different things on the walls. And What's interesting about it as well, this is if you are, it's a bit like being at IKEA or in a shopping center. You have no connection to the outside world when you're inside a bunker. And I think you can feel the 2-meter walls and you can feel the ceiling, and it intensifies your feeling of walking through it. And by the art being placed in it and you being able to see this art from different angles, suddenly the art becomes so much more important, I think, than maybe in other museums, because the building's not really that important here. The art is the thing that allows you to orientate yourself in this building. You see a piece of art, you go on to the next floor and you see it again, and then you say, aha, I've been here before, you know. Just like we can see now from when where the sun comes in, where we are in a normal building. So you have spaces like this one, which is really interesting, where you have like 3 floors connected, then connected across and connected to the top. So on every floor of the building, you can go in and see this room. This is a room which was created specifically for this piece by Olafur Eliasson. See, actually the only room that we created specifically for one piece of art, because it needed a certain space for his ventilator. And I always imagined that big sun that he'd done in the Tate Gallery, but instead it was this tiny ventilator hanging from a very long string, and it's absolutely fascinating piece because it moves with air pressure, very simply. A lot of people in there, the ventilator gets overexcited, moves very fast. Less people, it's less excited. And then, as it is with things that are temporary, that always stay forever, it's with things that are non-temporary, that gets changed out. So this is Ai Weiwei, 4 years later, in the same space, one of those pieces. And as you go through the museum, we tested, I mean, it was a bit of an experiment. The good thing is, we tested the normal white cube situation. This is also Eliasson's work is from the first exhibition. But we also tested leaving the traces on the walls, which worked really well with this piece by Anselm Reilly. And the artists were involved together with Christian Boros and also his wife, Karen. And they could walk around and they could discuss together the spaces, which spaces they actually wanted and how they wanted the things to be exhibited. On top, there's another floor where we added something, and we always felt that how are you going to add something to this really, really big box of concrete on the outside? Are you going to start competing? And I think that's one of the things, because we just had in Graz now, we've been discussing this historical buildings and keeping historical buildings and what's heritage and all that stuff. This building is a heritage building, but we always felt we don't need to, we can't compete with this. So we try and put something on top that looks pretty much like what's underneath it. So this is us breaking through the ceiling, the 3-meter ceiling, to kind of get up onto the light. And then you have the remainder where you can see the pure force of I mean, the craziness of this, if you can see these, this is a person, and the thickness of these iron rods that are inside the concrete, protecting you from these bombs that nobody needs in the first place. So when I talk about pragmatism, this is really, my feeling is very strong about this, that it's quite difficult to argue a case for building this building in the first place. So it feels really good destroying it in parts. And so we've left some of that destruction visible. This is the staircase going up to the apartment. And then when you get up into the apartment, we've kind of tried to use a similar material, so it's homogeneous, it's all concrete, and then because there's no war anymore, we have glass instead of a 2-meter outer wall. We can bring some light into the center of the plan. We try and work with similar I mean, the walls are actually pretty much there where they are underneath, which would be structurally, is actually completely irrelevant. So it's just because you have 3 meters of concrete in between it, but it's a kind of way of working your way through. A little bit similar like in Goro's apartment, we have a slightly raised platform to again change your perspective. You have some quite simple things like this is slightly narrower than that, so you know, this is more public and this is more private. It's just very, very simple things. I don't know if you can notice that, because I know maybe the architects among us who know how hard this is, working with our dear friends, the engineers, that have to put all the stuff inside to make this building work. So you can see there's no electricity plugs or nothing in there, because we spent like 3 days in a workshop with them, hiding them everywhere. This is part of minimalist architecture. You spend a lot of time hiding stuff and trying to find solutions, of course, which is the better way than the hiding. We let ourselves be inspired by the wooden railings, and so we have oak for everything that you kind of touch. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is the guest room. This is the type of room you need when you don't want your guests to stay for too long. So I think this is perfect. Family and friends, welcome to my house for an hour or two. And then you can move on. So having done that project, John Pawson, who you might know from London, a great minimalist British architect, who is an expert in the hiding part of the things. He was collaborating with Desiree Feuerle and Sarah Puig, who have the Feuerle collection, and they were traveling around Europe trying to find a place to put this collection in, and they bought a bunker. And so then they phoned us and said, do you want Petra to do this bunker together with me? So first I thought it was a joke. I thought, yeah, sure. I thought it was somebody pulling my leg, saying, yeah, we bought this bunker and we're going to put an art collection in it, and then the art collector is going to live on top. And I thought, yeah, done that. But it's not like that, because the minute you start categorizing things, you already create a situation where you can say this is not there is no category bunker, except for the fact that there's loads of concrete. That's about what they have together. And this is a picture from, I would say, it's the end, it's the 50s maybe. I don't know, people who know about cars can probably recognize it better than me. You can still see the Anhalter Bahnhof in Berlin. This is Hallisches Ufer. Potsdamer Platz is a bit further to the side. It was a telecommunication bunker. That means this one was built for the machinery, for the communication of the Reichsbahn. So this is, I think, even brutal on another level. You know, this is where the German train company had all their communication, and this is what those funny pods on top of the roof are for air conditioning system. And the bunker is partly above the ground and partly below. When we got in there, because the bunkers, the Reichsbank belonged to the DDR. This place was located in the west, but it was still part of the DDR. And so nobody entered this building for like 50 years, except for after the wall came down, and then of course the usual stuff, the graffiti, the parties, there was some fire in there and things like that. So this is what we found when we kind of came into it. And so now we come into this situation again where there is something, I mean, there's something cool about it, there's something a bit romantic, about the ruin. You know, we all have this very big thing in the Romantic period to have ruined buildings. And then at the same time, it's incredibly brutal. And it had water in it. So there was water coming in because the water level is very high in Berlin, and it was just, that's a problem. That's actually still a problem. We have a very patient client for that. We have water in the staircase. We had stalactites in the ceiling. So what we tried to do is actually work on this project and try to keep as much as possible. This is a plan. You can say you come in here, there's a ground floor, you come in here, you walk down, you start the exhibition down here, you walk up. This space here, which is about, let's say, just under 1,000 square meters, is just a room with water in it. And this space up here is also part of the exhibition. This is again a picture to show you the craziness of the construction, pulling the things down. This is a picture which I like to show just in case people think we didn't do anything, because working with minimalist architecture and trying to kind of pull the building back from it being sort of not so imposing. Of course, we try and make it look like we didn't do anything, so I like to show these plans for the people. And this is another picture which is really important to me, because I think that what we all forget, and that's why it's so important in this discussion of the specialized architect, we need to go on the building site, because honestly, the stuff that we plan sometimes is just so crazy. And in this building, you couldn't get a machine inside it, so you had to get these guys to carry in this one big sheet of glass, which isn't even that big compared to the sheets of glass that get produced in some of the buildings that we build. And this is the reality of building sites. This is what it's like. There is a guy with a bucket sitting down doing something. This is still the reality of any building site in the world. And when you look at the tower blocks in China, or you look at the tower blocks in Abu Dhabi or whatever, that's what you've got. You've got a guy with a bucket and a saw or a screwdriver walking around, standing there, plastering the wall. And I think it's something that we should never forget. This is us putting in the places for the art pieces, testing the light, looking back at the wall. We put in this mirrored glass building part inside it, which is a scent room now. And this is where you come in to when the art actually, Desiree Feuerle collects ancient artifacts and from Asia, and they're partly 1,000-year-olds, some of the things, and then he combines them together with contemporary photography, in this case the Japanese photographer, and then you can see the incredible difference between these really fine worked art pieces and the incredibly rough bunker. And as you might have seen, I don't know, in one of these pictures, we still got the stalactites in the ceiling, so we saved those. We put those under heritage. I think I've spoken a little bit over my time, so I don't know, I still wanted to show this project very quickly, because I think it might be interesting for the people from Vienna, which we're doing together with my previous, the previous person speaking, Mark Neunauf and the Office of Most Likely. We did a competition together for the Kobenze, and funnily enough, we won it. And now we're doing this project together. This is one of the romantic, and this is sustainable, I guess, in a way of that this is a place that a lot of people from Vienna remember, and it has history, and people want to go there, and this is much happier than all these bunkers, which are quite depressing. And this is a place to have parties, to get married, to meet people. It's got co-working spaces in it. It's got lots of ideas, and it's about taking something that is there, existing, cleaning it up a bit. So we have these existing buildings that we are clearing some of the stuff that's been built over the years onto these buildings away to give them some space, and then we are adding some new buildings. And so we have trying to create under the principle of that you create a whole picture in the end, where it's no longer so important what's old and what's new, but the whole thing has to work as one thing. We have these different parts of where people can meet, where people can stand on the roofs looking out over the city. There are the gardens and the views and the workspaces. And this is just to show you that this is similar to the other plans, to show you that we're actually doing something. It's quite complex. The things coming together, which you have to do all the backspaces for. This is a view, quite a current perspective, and we're going to be handing in the planning application quite soon, and if all goes well, it goes on site, maybe, I don't know, this year, next year, 2 years, be finished, I don't know. We want to keep optimistic. And again, here it's about combining the existing with some of the new things, picking up on what is there, what we have found in the space, and trying to reactivate that. Here you can see a picture of the whole thing sitting up in the mountains, and then just to finish off this is the bar where you can look down over your beautiful city. Thank you very much.